Before the war, Russia still had a window. You could travel, study abroad, fly to Europe and read foreign social media. You could dream that tomorrow will be better than yesterday. Then Putin started the full-scale war against Ukraine, and that window began to close. People often ask what Ukraine lost. That question is right and necessary. But today, I want to ask another one. What did Russia lose by choosing this war? I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today we'll look at the losses Russians are trained not to see. Here's our roadmap. The closed window. How Russians lost easy access to the world. The stolen reality. How censorship creates an alternative version of truth. The missing goods. How familiar brands vanished and returned as expensive contraband. The broken routes. How transport became slower, pricier, and more fragile. The trapped money. How payments, credit, and business were squeezed by war. The lost markets. How Russia gave away customers it spent decades obtaining. The human drain. How the war pushed out brains, workers, and hope. If you'd like to keep getting this kind of deep dive analysis, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also join my think tank, support through PayPal or Super Thanks, or tap high points to help this episode travel further. And if you are listening on Spotify, follow the show so the next episode lands in your feed automatically. Now, let's begin with the first loss. The closed window. The closed window. The main thing Russia lost is access. Now, if you are a Russian citizen, you can't board a plane without making a strategy. Before 2022, this was normal for millions of Russians, especially in large cities. Moscow and St. Petersburg were full of people who spent their vacation in Europe or had family studying and working there. The war broke that rhythm. The European Union suspended its visa facilitation agreement with Russia in 2022. That didn't ban all Russian travelers, but it made visas slower, more expensive, and more uncertain. Later, the rules grew stricter. Some countries stopped issuing tourist visas almost entirely. Others kept issuing them, but with more scrutiny, fewer multiple entry visas, and longer waiting times. That made travel a privilege, almost like it was in the Soviet Union. In Russian culture, travel and ties to foreign countries are markers of class and status. Before the war, people with money would often fly to Europe just for the weekend. If you spent your vacation in Italy or France, that sent a very clear message. Life had turned out well. Now, a vast number of Russians no longer have that option, and not only because they personally cannot get visas, but because the companies they work for are under sanctions. When you apply for a visa, you have to state where you work. Many top officials and businessmen are under personal sanctions as well. That is even more humiliating. A great number of them own property in Europe with millions of dollars invested in it, but they cannot actually use any of that wealth. So now, even very rich people find themselves in the awkward position of having to put on a brave face and insist that they do not need Paris or London anyway. Turkish bedroom suits them just fine. Even if you get a visa, every trip now means connection flights through Istanbul, Yerevan, Belgrade, Dubai, or Tbilisi, and paying several times as much as before for a ticket. The stolen reality. The second thing Russia lost is reality. When a state controls what people are allowed to know, it steals the shared ground under everyone's feet. Since the full-scale invasion, Russian media have been forced to use the official language of the state, not war or invasion, but specially military operation. Roskomnadzor instructed outlets to rely on official defense ministry information and punished those that told the truth. Independent media were blocked, pushed abroad, labeled foreign agents, or crushed by censorship laws. Facebook and Instagram were blocked. Access to foreign news became harder. VPNs became part of ordinary life for people who still wanted the outside world. And even the internet started to feel unstable. Freedom House reported that Russian internet freedom reached a new low, with authorities expanding isolation from the global internet and testing restrictions under the excuse of security and drone threats. This is how a country loses reality. A war happens, but television does not call it a war. Cities are attacked, but local media pretended life is normal. Men die, but the state TV shows concerts. Prices rise, but officials report stability. And sometimes the absurdity becomes almost comic. During the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June 2026, Ukrainian drones struck targets in and around the city, including oil infrastructure and naval facilities. Fires broke out, smoke was visible from downtown, flights were disrupted, and strikes landed near the very city hosting Putin's polished economic showcase. This should have been the dominant local story, but Russian local coverage tried to keep this spell intact. On the day of the attack, Fontanka, the city's most popular outlet, ran this as its top front page item: watching a beautiful sunset in St. Petersburg. Meanwhile, the whole city could hear the blasts and see a vast cloud of smoke hanging over it. That is Russia now. The sky is burning, and the headline says, "Admire the colors." This is not only censorship, but psychological training. Over time, this creates a special kind of person. Someone who knows the truth but behaves as if he does not know it. The Soviet Union trained people in this skill for decades. You could stand in a line for flour and still hear on television that the socialist economy was the most advanced in the world. You could know your neighbor was arrested for nothing and still clap at a meeting. The missing goods. Before the war, Russians in big cities lived inside the same consumer world as Europeans and Americans, with IKEA furniture, Apple phones, Zara clothes, Nike sneakers, and McDonald's. Then, one by one, the familiar names left. Some closed stores or sold their Russian business. Some stayed in legal form but cut operations so deeply that the old relationship was gone. Russia answered with parallel imports. That means Russian companies bringing in foreign goods without the permission of the trademark owner. The product may be real, but the route is illegal. A phone is not sent directly from Apple to Russia. It goes through another country: China, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, the UAE, or another middleman. At every stop, someone earns money, and the Russian buyer pays for all of that. This is why the shelves did not become empty Soviet shelves. Many of the same goods as before are still available, but harder to get and much more expensive. An iPhone can still be bought in Moscow. IKEA-style furniture can still appear through resellers. Branded shoes can still reach a shopping mall. But the old world of warranty, official service, stable pricing, and normal choice is broken. This does not only hit the middle class, but also the industry. Modern Russian manufacturing depends on imported components, software, machine tools, and electronics. Agriculture depends on imported seeds, machines, and chemicals. When those links become slower and more expensive, repairs take longer and quality degrades. Substitutes are found, but not always good ones. Medicine shows the same pattern. The import of medicines themselves was not broadly sanctioned, but the war still made them harder to move and more expensive to finance as payments became harder and foreign suppliers became cautious. When import channels get strained, patients feel it. At the end, Russia did not become self-sufficient. It only became dependent on more complicated routes and more expensive middlemen. The broken routes. The war turned any movement to, from, or around Russia into improvisation. Russian planes were banned from EU airspace. European planes stopped flying to Russia. Direct routes to many countries disappeared. At the same time, even transport inside Russia became more fragile. Aviation is one of the clearest examples. Russian airlines still fly many Western-made planes, but official access to Boeing and Airbus parts was cut. So the system depends on workarounds, cannibalizing aircraft, finding parts through third countries, using substitute suppliers, stretching maintenance systems. Cars tell the same story. Western, Japanese, and Korean brands pulled back or left. Chinese brands rushed in. By 2024, Chinese cars dominated a huge share of Russia's new car market. The Kremlin presents this as a pivot to the east. In practice, it means Russia exchanged one dependency for another and paid more for it. Chinese cars are not automatically bad. The problem is dependency under bad conditions. Russia is no longer a normal competitive market where global brands fight for the consumer. It is a sanctioned market where sellers understand that buyers have fewer choices. That means markups. Russian analysts report that new car prices rose sharply after the invasion. The average price of a new car in Russia became far higher than in China, even though Chinese brands make up a large share of Russian sales. An average Chinese car price in Russia starts at $45,000, which is 25% to 50% more than this same car sells in Europe. There is a scheme where zero-mileage vehicles are exported from China to Russia as used cars, allowing restrictions to be skirted while dealers still sell them in Russia at prices close to new cars. The same is true for luxury electric cars. A Tesla is not officially sold in Russia, but you can still find Teslas in Moscow for parallel importers. Model 3 comes at $70,000, more than twice its price in Europe. The Moscow price includes the risk margin and the cut of each middleman. But that is not all. Ukrainian drones are regularly striking oil infrastructure, which is already causing fuel shortages, especially in remote regions and the occupied territories. Given that Putin has no intention of ending the war and Ukrainians have no intention of surrendering, this trend will only intensify. Already, in Crimea, it is impossible to buy gasoline unless you have official authorization. The trapped money. The fifth thing Russia lost was normal money. After 2022, Russian cards stopped working normally abroad as Visa and MasterCard suspended operations in Russia. If you travel abroad, the Russian bank card in your pocket is useless. Visa and MasterCard suspended network services in Russia in March 2022. Cards issued by Russian banks kept working inside Russia through the domestic payment system, but outside the country, they stopped functioning. It is impossible to pay for many foreign services directly. That includes software, subscriptions, cloud services, education platforms, and many other tools people need for their work. A whole small industry appeared around this. People who help pay for foreign services, people who exchange rubles into dollars, euros, kryptos, and stablecoins, people who receive money abroad and hand it over through another channel, people who open cards in neighboring countries. All these middlemen charge a percentage for making normal life possible. Again, everyone earns except the person who just wanted to pay a bill. Sending money to relatives became harder too. A Russian parent helping a child abroad or a son sending money to an elderly mother now have to look for a reliable intermediary instead of simply making a bank transfer. Trapped money also includes credit. Russia's war economy flooded some parts of society with cash. Soldiers, defense workers, and military contractors received money. But the supply of normal goods and productive capacity did not grow in the same way. That creates inflation pressure. So the central bank has to keep interest rates high. The key rate reached 21% in late 2024, then was cut gradually, but borrowing remained painfully expensive. Today, the rate stands at 14.5%. For business, this is brutal. A normal entrepreneur needs credit to buy equipment, expand to new markets, or modernize production. But when loans are too expensive, investment dies. Then the state offers high yields through banks and deposits. From the point of view of a cautious person, the choice becomes obvious. Why risk opening a business in a shrinking, sanctioned economy when a bank deposit can provide a huge return? This is how war eats the future twice. First, it takes money directly to spend on weapons and soldiers, then it makes peaceful investment irrational. Factories postpone modernization. Small businesses stop expanding. Infrastructure wears out. Everything waits because the money is elsewhere. And the state cannot easily fix this. Cut rates too fast, and inflation can jump. Keep rates high, and businesses weakens. Spend less on war, and the regime becomes shaky. Spend more on war, and the civilian economy collapses under the weight. The lost markets. Before the war, Europe was Russia's most valuable energy customer. Then the full-scale invasion destroyed that relationship. Europe cut Russian energy with a speed many people thought impossible. Russian seaborne crude and oil products were banned, cutting EU-Russian oil imports by about 90%. So who replaced Europe? China, India, Turkey, and other buyers in Asia and the global south. But replacement does not mean equality. Europe was close, rich, predictable, and tied to Russia by infrastructure. India and China are farther away, tougher negotiators, and happy to buy at a discount when Russia has fewer options. The same logic applies beyond oil. Russia also damaged its weapons market. For years, Russian arms had a strong reputation in many parts of the world. They were cheaper than Western weapons, battle-tested, and familiar to countries that had used Soviet systems for decades. India, Vietnam, Algeria, Egypt, and others built military habits around Russian platforms. The war exposed the weakness behind the image. The world saw Russian tanks burn and air defenses fail to create a safe sky. The Black Sea Fleet was pushed back by a country with no traditional navy. The aura of unstoppable Soviet-style military engineering is now gone. Over the first 3 years of war, Russian arms exports fell by 64%. That's essentially a collapse. France, the United States, South Korea, Turkey, China, and others stepped into spaces Russia once occupied. India is building more at home and buying more from other suppliers. Countries that still buy Russian weapons must now ask a practical question. Can Moscow deliver on time when its own army is burning through equipment in Ukraine? And then there are the quieter export losses. Russia once sold not only oil and weapons, but metallurgy, chemicals, fertilizers, nuclear technology, engineering services, timber, and grain. Some of that still continues. War did not make Russia disappear from world trade, but it changed the terms to worse as buyers demand discounts, logistics cost more, payments and insurance are harder, and sanctions risk follows every deal. The human drain. The deepest thing Russia lost was people, who could have built its future. After February 2022, hundreds of thousands left, and many of them were exactly the people a country needs most. Software developers, designers, journalists, entrepreneurs, scientists, and artists. People with languages, professions, savings, and enough initiative to start again in another country. I have a dedicated video about where these people went and how they adapted in their new countries. A study of software developers found that by November 2022, over 11% of highly active Russian developers in the dataset had changed their listed country. The study also found that those who left were often more active in professional networks. At the same time, Russia has a labor shortage. The war pulled men into the army and defense industry, while demographics were already weak. The state needs workers for factories, construction, agriculture, logistics, and services. Reuters reported that Russia needs at least 2.3 million additional workers and has started looking more actively toward India as the inflow from Central Asia becomes less reliable. And there is one more loss, the one that may be the hardest to measure. Russia lost calm. One recent immigrant told me that in the early 2010s, people were kinder and more cheerful. Many felt that things were moving slowly towards something better. You could travel, work, learn, build, save, and make plans. Now, he said, people are angry and frightened. Everyone watches what they say. That is the real wound. A country can live through hardship if people believe the hardship leads somewhere. But Putin's war offers no future. Only more fear, more isolation, and more expensive ways to pretend that nothing was lost. Before you go, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever lost access to something you once took for granted? Travel, work, money, information, a place, a language, a future, and only later understood how much of your life had depended on it. If this video helped you understand what the war has cost Russia from the inside, please like the video and subscribe. Share it with one person who still thinks Putin's war only damaged Ukraine and the West. And if you want to support this work directly, you can join my think tank. Leave a super thanks, support via PayPal, or tap hype points to help this episode travel further. And for those listening on Spotify, follow the show so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you next time.